So hi, welcome everybody. My name is Chris Kinzel. I am the Associate for Communication here at the Westchester Biotech Project. And today we are fortunate to have Laura Greene and Doreen Badheka with us. They've both been really good to our group, and you'll learn a lot more about them. Laura is a communications expert of sorts, previous researcher, and should be really good today. I'm here to learn as well, Laura. So first of all, the Westchester Biotech Project, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with us. If it's your first time joining us, welcome, and we hope you join us again in the future. So there's a lot about our organization, just give you a kind of a brief overview. So we're essentially a nonprofit organization that's focused on bringing together researchers, engineers, and data scientists within the Westchester region and beyond. So we like to say kind of our term is opportunity density. On this slide, if you're not aware, we have our Rare Disease Symposium on July 18th. It should be great. We have a wonderful lineup. You can go to our website and see those details. We're on LinkedIn. And just so you know, this session will be recorded. We have multiple sessions on various wonderful topics on YouTube, so you can check that out as well. Want to give a shout out to Michael and Joanne. They're here today, our co-founders. We started about a year ago, and they've done a lot to build us up. So this opportunity density, and so I think the quickest way I could describe our organization is if you envision a bunch of resources in a community, the Westchester County and the country and internationally, you know, there's a lot of great minds, there's a lot of wonderful projects, a lot of people doing different things, but oftentimes they don't have the opportunity to meet each other and collaborate, and they kind of don't know that they exist. And so we kind of bring together this community, we convene this community in the hopes that it drives innovation and accelerates progress, and that good relationships can be born and projects can go forward. So here's a little sampling, and we don't really think of our programs on our own. It's really the community. It's really you guys that give us the insights. You know, we want to know what the need is and what people want to get behind, and try to accelerate it and give it energy and give our support through programs and webinars. We're passionate about the younger generation and education and kind of some of those things that people don't learn in school, as well as bringing together the professional community to collaborate on larger projects. So, for example, this webinar is in sorts part of our Young Investigator series, which is focused on teaching you things that you might not have had a lot of exposure to in school. And that's what Doreen helps us with as well, and we're very happy that you're here with us today, Doreen. We just had our innovation and research, which is great. You can check on our website. We have some news articles. And again, July 18th, come and join us, Rare Disease Symposium. It's hosted by Iona College. And more details on all our programs are on our website. And again, reach out if you have ideas and you want to talk and work with us, because it's really all about you. This kind of brings together what I'm talking about. A nice quote from Carla Romney, another great friend of our organization. It's kind of what we do, you know, bringing together scientists, engineers, and clinicians from these companies and institutions is really how things get going. It's people meeting people and talking and sitting down and having discussions and generating ideas. You know, that's how we're going to make things happen. And on the same note, we've had a lot of great sponsors, community partners, I should say, and alliance partners. Just from a year ago, these groups, we wouldn't be able to do anything without them. We're a nonprofit, and we rely on our community and the support, and we've received tremendous support from all these people. We didn't know how much need there would be for this type of forum, but there is, and we're excited for the rest of this year and beyond. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Doreen Badheka. She's a program director for the graduate school at Rutgers. And again, she's been a wonderful friend to us, and we're really happy you're here. And thanks again.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. I think we will start the webinar shortly, and I'll handle over the controls to Laura. But before I do that, I want to introduce Laura and give a shout out to two of our senior PhD students, Angelina and Prerna, who are students here at the School of Graduate Studies, which is part of the Rutgers Biomedical and Health Science. And they have put in a lot of work by participating behind the scenes and multiple exercises, worked with Dr. Laura Greene, and I'm very excited for them. And again, Prerna and Angelina, hats off to you for taking the first step and taking this courage to participate in this interesting exercise. And that brings me back to introduce Dr. Laura Greene. She's an immunologist with PhD in cellular and molecular biology, and she has also worked as a postdoctoral researcher in multiple sclerosis. So this is, again, a shout out to all the postdocs who are out there and looking for transitioning out of the lab. And Dr. Greene is an expert in coaching scientists on how to engage with members of the public, write lay audience translations of research achievements, develop hands-on science activities for education, and especially produce eye-catching visuals. And right now, Dr. Greene is manager of the Cancer Consortium at Fred Hutch, where she works on data analysis, communications, and project management for the NCI Cancer Center Support Grant. And in numbers, that means she works with approximately 600 researchers who contribute more than $220 million in cancer research activities. At Fred Hutch, she also develops written content for the center-wide communications, which again helps translate technical science research for the general audience, and she creates amazing infographics, biological schematics, and also manages other projects which include database upgrades, web tool development, and much more. And I encourage all of you to go look at Laura's LinkedIn profile. You will be truly inspired. And with that, Laura, the stage is all yours.
Thanks, Doreen. First of all, can everybody hear? Is the audio all right?
It's great.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thanks, Doreen. Thanks, Chris. And especially thanks to Angelina and Prerna for your participation. Today, what I thought we'd have a chat about Spark Talks. So those short, sharp talks where you need to translate really complex technical topics. And we're going to kind of break this down into a couple different parts. So first, we'll kick off by just talking about what they are, why they're there, and then we'll dive deep into the structure of Spark Talks and how you can take apart the individual components and then build it together to articulate a really concise presentation about a really technical topic. We'll have a couple examples, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions along the way, feel free to put them into the chat box. Doreen and Chris are there, and they're going to be moderating, so feel free to interact with questions. The more interactive, the better. So with that, classic who, what, where, why, when, and how. Spark Talks are generally those 1 minute, 3 minute, or 5 minute talks. They come in a lot of different flavors and names. You may have heard them as Flash Talks, Lightning Talks, Ignite Talks, or even Pachakashow. So they all kind of have that same structure and meat behind them. It's how can we concisely communicate and articulate a technical topic in a way that's kind of short and punchy and bite-sized. The purpose of these are really for sparking new conversations and collaborations, or maybe you're in a mass of people that want to pitch new ideas, and it's kind of like advertising for the attention of your audience. I need you to invest in my science or my technology. It can also be a way to quickly inform a group on a variety of different topics, and it's a way to learn lots in a small amount of time. So these types of talks really have their origins in the tech and programming world. They've been around for about 10 years officially, if you try and track the history and evolution of Spark Talks or Lightning Talks. Now, I just want to mention that while these may have grown up in the tech world, they may not have been purposely designed to follow psychological or behavioral trends in modern society. And I just want to say that the rapid incorporation of these short talks, of these lightning talks or spark talks, really have parallels with some of the changes that we're seeing in contemporary learning patterns for adults. And you might hear the words micro-learning or bite-sized learning, micro-lectures, micro-content. And what this really is kind of a new way that adults and young people are learning and absorbing their content. Now, some like to draw connections to the advent of high-speed internet, and now that we're multitasking a lot more and your audiences generally have a divided attention, and these bite-sized pieces of information are a way to kind of get information out to people. But if you look at the physiological side of this, our brain has a limited capacity to take in information. So generally around 20 minutes of 20 consecutive minutes, give or take, is what our brain's physiological ability is to stay focused. And so, I mean, how many science talks have you been to or seminars you've been to that have been 30, 40 minutes or even an hour and a half? If you think about your brain's biological capacity, you're losing concentration more than halfway in, and you're missing an entire chunk of data. And so these short, sharp types of communications are really a way that prevent your brain from overloading with information. It allows you to stay focused on the topic. And research has actually shown that these short communication, sorry, was there a question?
No, I think someone joined and it cut in for a second.
Okay. So basically, from a physiological point of view, short communications under 5 minutes really help allow your audience to engage, stay focused, and it also increases their ability to incorporate that knowledge into their long-term memory, which are all really important and crucial items that you need, especially if you're trying to form new scientific collaborations. So providing information in these kind of snackable chunks is going to increase the knowledge retention and have your audience coming back for more. And if you think about trying to pursue new scientific areas or avenues, these three components of engagement, retention, and coming back for more are going to be crucial in trying to form those new relationships and collaborations that will help you move your science forward. So let's talk a little bit about what goes into your Spark Talk. So today we're working on the idea that you have 3 minutes and 1 slide. So brevity and simplicity, you've got to get to your point. And with that type of time constraint, we need to be very selective on the type of language that you're using. What is the big problem? What is the solution? And what are you doing to get there? Ideally, you only have about 3 minutes, and that means you can make 2 to 3 points max. If you look at a common story structure, generally what you're going to do is like climbing a mountain. You kind of lay the groundwork, you're on your approach, you're going to start gathering details, and ultimately you reach the most exciting part. You gather a few more details, add to the story, and then at the end you're comparing the difference between before and after your story started. When you only have 3 minutes and only 2 to 3 points to make, you need to focus in on the meat of this mountain ascent. And a story structure for a Spark Talk is going to look more like start at the most exciting part. What's the problem? You're going to move to what is the solution? How did we solve this? And then you can use the remainder of your time to discuss how we got there. This way you're capitalizing on that initial attention of your audience. And as long as they can retain what the problem is and what the solution is, all the extra information is bonus. And that's where you get to kind of grab them and get them to come back for more. So if we go back to what this bite-sized learning or these adult learning practices, let's talk a little bit more about what actually goes into this, because there's a lot of research to show that adults learn differently than children. And assuming that majority of your audience for your science Spark Talk are not going to be toddlers, it pays to consider what your audience is going to be constructed of. So if we look at how adults learn, it can be broken down into 4 basic areas. So what you should start with is, what is your core story? What is the one thing that you want your audience to walk away with? And you should be able to sum this up in maybe 10 words, 15 seconds. If you can nut down your core story to that short amount, then you can start to build on some of these different pockets that will help you connect with an adult audience. So first, if we look at experience, adults learn by relating information to a personal experience or knowledge base. So if they've seen it or done it before, adults will have a quicker ability to latch on to an idea. So if you're talking about science, this is where you can start to think about what are some of those shared experiences that you have with your audience. Do they all work in a lab? Do they all work in the same kind of lab? Do they all work with the same biology? And if you can start working way backwards, you will find that common ground that will allow you to relate immediately to your audience on the shared experience. This is also where metaphors are fantastic. So if it's not immediately known what those shared experiences are, you can use a metaphor that is more likely to have an immediate recognition. And that may be going back to a shared experience with parenthood or childhood. Any one of those is going to help you connect your story quicker with your audience. And in a Spark Talk, the name of the game is kind of shortening that connection point. You don't really have the opportunity to build up your story and have them go on a journey with you. You need to get to your point. So if you can make that connection and draw those dotted lines, you're going to kick off a lot better. Adults also like to learn in basis of practicality. So how can I apply this information in my daily life? What does this teach me? Do I need to know this in order to do my job every day? Goal-oriented communication is also really helpful. So this is more, again, why do I need this information? This information will help my child avoid this, or this information will help me be more efficient in my lab practices. And then lastly, the 4th bucket for adult learning is relevance. So, again, why do I need to learn this? Why is this important to me? And if you can answer all of these questions in relation to your core story, you're going to find, again, a quicker connection to your audience. And the ultimate goal with this is to get your audience on a common ground so that you're all starting from that same background of information, and then you can build. So for biology, and especially basic biology, this can be really difficult sometimes, especially when you're dealing with molecular pathways or receptors and signaling. These aren't really, they're more abstract concepts. And if you're not in the weeds every day working with them, it's going to take your audience a little bit more time to connect the ideas that you're sharing to their own personal experiences or their own personal relevance and how that they're going to apply that. So again, work your way backwards until you find that common ground, connect the dots right away, and make sure that everybody is starting at the same level on the same page. So let's go into a couple different examples of how to apply some of these bite-sized or audience planning techniques. If anybody has seen me present before, this is a really common photo that I love to share, especially when I'm talking about drug design or drug screening. So when I used to work with synthetic chemists, they were talking about bond formation and binding pockets. I was working with pharmacokinetics, and that group of people were working in metabolism and clearance. And then my side of things was looking at the in vivo applications of this. And we were really all speaking different languages. So to make sure that we're all on the common ground, I used to share this image. And this image, for me, it works in a lot of different ways. So working with scientists, I usually use this as an opening photo, and it kind of brings it down to ground level. And what we're all trying to achieve ultimately at the end of the day, the grand sum of our project is we're trying to get a drug to fit into its target. This picture also works when speaking with the general public because of shared experiences. Most people have had a toy like this at some point in their lives, or they have children right now that have toys like this, and it's very clear what the goal is. And so starting with this as a way to describe my science, immediately the audience, because of their shared experience, can get the basic underpinning of what I'm trying to achieve through my research. And as a side note, I'll also say that I have used this toy to teach toddlers about drug design. And surprisingly, they latch onto it because kids have almost always had a toy like this accessible, and they know exactly what to do. And so you can get the point across quite quickly. So another example is called code switching. So imagine, code switching is basically how you tell the same story, but to different audiences. And when you're putting together your Spark Talk, it really pays to consider who's in that audience. What are their experiences? What's the language they speak? What are the pieces of equipment they use, the jargon they use, and making sure that everybody, again, is on that common ground so you can connect and connect quickly. So for example, imagine you are going to a cafe to meet your friends, and you ride your bike everywhere, and your friends know that you ride your bike everywhere, and you had an interesting event on your way. And so you're going to go into the cafe, and you're going to meet your friends, and you're going to say, oh my gosh, I almost got hit at Lloyd's on my way here. Short and sharp. Your friends all know that you ride. They all know where Lloyd's is, and they know that Lloyd's has this interesting intersection in it. And they know that when you say you almost got hit, it means you know, that you were on your bike and something happened at this intersection. So you have this common ground with an audience that is deep in the weeds with you, and so you can be quite short and quite punchy because you don't have to add a lot of context to help them understand what was happening. Let's say you're going to the cafe and you're not meeting a friend. Instead, you're meeting a stranger and you want to share that same story. The goal of the story could be for informing them, for entertaining them, but again, you need to consider what's that common ground. They may not know that you ride your bike everywhere, and so you may start that conversation with, I'm a cyclist and I ride my bike every day. Earlier this year, the city invested in improving cycleways, but it turns out that you know, there was some consideration that was lacking at this one intersection by Lloyd's grocery store. And on my way here, there was an incident. So hopefully you can see that you're not going to approach speaking to your friend or to a stranger in the same way. Finally, if you were a scientist trying to tell a group of strangers about this occurrence, if you put this into the context of a traditional science talk, it's going to sound something like, in 1914 was the advent of the first cycleway dedicated in urban environments, and you'll go and talk about the history and the mechanisms before getting to the punchline. So hopefully you can see with these three different examples the need to adjust the type of language and the storytelling techniques that you use to approach a different audience. If it's a friend, you're on that same level, your common ground is already established. If it's a stranger, you may need to add some context. If you approach it with a typical scientific approach, you're going to miss out on kind of the exciting bits of the story and possibly lose the attention of your audience while you run out of time in a 3-minute or 5-minute Spark Talk. Also, the really fun thing that I see can be quite difficult for a lot of communicators in technical areas is the removal of jargon. And when you only have a short amount of time to make a really important point, we need to remove some of the jargon. And again, you know, you're talking to a technical audience. Let's imagine you're at a conference and you're doing quick 3-minute talks to advertise for a poster session. And you want to sound scientific and you want to sound technical and you want to show your street cred with other audience members and hopefully get the attention of some professors or senior scientists to come and talk to you at your poster. But if we break down something as simple as the title that you see here, which is G protein coupled receptor antagonist to mitigate inflammation. As a scientist, I know what this is. As somebody who's worked in this area, this makes perfect sense to me right off the bat. But if you don't work with G coupled protein receptors and you don't work with antagonists and you don't work with inflammation, it's not going to be immediately relevant to you. So you may know individually what a G-coupled protein receptor is. You may know individually what an antagonist is. You'll know what mitigate means, and you'll know what inflammation means. But together, it's going to take your audience an extended period of time to put all of those together and understand the relationship and then come up with the conclusion of why they need to know this or why it's relevant or why you're talking about it. And while your audience is trying to piece these individual bits together, they're not going to be listening to you, and they're not going to be listening to what the problem is, what the solution is, what you got there, or what you want them to do with this information. So by simplifying these titles, you're not dumbing down your talk. You're just helping your audience form those connections of relevancy a lot faster. So you're ensuring that they are staying engaged with your talk and that they're getting the most crucial information, which is you're an awesome scientist and this is how your science stands out from the rest. And ultimately, that's what you want to achieve with your Spark Talk in the setting like a poster session or a conference. So in addition to language and content and considering who your audience is, a lot of these flash talks or Spark Talks will have a visual component to that. And each type of short talk may have different rules where you get 1 slide, you get 3 slides, or in Pakucha, you have 20 seconds for 20 slides. Altogether, they're all trying to achieve the same goal, which is short, punchy communication again, and using visual tools. So for scientists and technicians, it's really common to try and push as much information into that poster or into that slide. It's kind of the mindset of, if I don't get to talk about it, that data is still there, and so people can just draw those conclusions and they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But again, when you have these short, sharp Spark Talks, you don't want your audience to be focusing on the minuscule details that are on your visuals. Instead, you want your visual to aid in your storytelling. So everything that goes into your visual should complement what you're speaking, and it should help create impact or support what it is that you're saying. The content in which you are conveying is the most important, and so try not to distract from your story by adding too much clutter into a slide. I'm a big proponent of using big images that you can talk around. So you're using a metaphor or something that people in your audience can immediately refer back to if they get lost and go, oh, that's right. That's what we're trying to do. So in this example, new drug designs that cross the blood-brain barrier. Let's say most of the people in your audience know what the blood-brain barrier is. And if they think about it, they know that, you know, it helps restrict molecules crossing one way or the other. So instead of having to constantly remember that, if they get lost in your story, this image immediately brings them back and reminds them what you're trying to achieve. We're talking about that blood-brain barrier. All of the science is all about trying to get drugs that will cross this barrier. Now, using a solid image like this is probably the most difficult way to go about it if you're new to doing short, sharp talks. If you're not comfortable using a single image to talk around, you can break your slide into components. Now, I'd recommend not going more than 4 components in total. You want to keep them simple, but you can use these as tools or cues to help you remember the different parts of your story and the different points you want to meet. A quick note about adding data. So again, if you're working with molecular pathways or macromolecules or other things that are a little bit more abstract, we tend to show data in comparison, show, hey, look, it's better. But again, you want to consider every single letter, every single point, every single line that you're putting in your data graphic on your slide, and ask, does this help the story? Does this detract from the story? So just in this example here on this particular graph, and the first thing I would ask, do I need to have all 4 of those lines to tell my story? You know, it's really common to just cut and paste from a journal article because it's there, you don't have to put any thought into it. But again, as an audience member, even if I'm an expert in your field, unless I've worked with this particular graph every single day, I'm going to spend my time trying to understand LDF, or those bars across the top. I'm going to start trying to match the different patterns of lines to the graph, and I'm going to look at that little b in parentheses going, oh, well, what does the rest of the graph look like? So when you have limited time, you want to get your message straight out there and take away these extra bits that are going to detract the attention of your audience, so that you ensure your audience is staying engaged and taking home the most important part of the story. And that's for you to decide what that important part of your story is. So we've had our 2 grad students who graciously volunteered to work with us. And one of the things I really loved about their before and after 3-minute talks is the effort that was put into their performance. So if you're talking about preparing a presentation, a lot goes into the content, the language, and the structure of your story. You should need to consider, are your visuals you know, adding to or detracting from your story? But oftentimes we tend to leave out the third and final part of great storytelling, and that's the performance itself. A lot of scientists, a lot of technicians, we're super busy, and I'm guilty of doing the same. We leave our presentations to the last moment. We prepare them on the plane, we prepare them on the night before, we prepare them as we're in the audience ready to get up and give our presentation. But it pays to actually step back for a little bit and consider how you're going to actually deliver the language and the structure and the story that you spent so much time working on. And first is common sense, body language. Your body language tells the audience a lot about you in a short period of time. And so when you get up to present your science, if you have your hands in your pocket, if you're fidgeting, if you're moving from side to side, your audience is going to make some snap judgments about you and your science and your presentation in those first 5 seconds before you even get a chance to open your mouth. So if you can practice you know, how you're going to stand your ground and thinking about different ways, if you're a fidgeter, if you need to move, you know, what are some techniques that you can do to kind of occupy so that your fidgeting isn't visible. For me, when I'm really nervous and giving a talk, you know, I have a tendency to want to click on a pen, and especially don't want to do that when it's going to be projected over a microphone somewhere. And so if I keep my hands at my side, generally, if you look really closely, you might find me just very quietly and very minimally pinching my forefinger and my thumb together when I'm trying to think. It's not that noticeable, and it helps kind of calm my nerves. Also think about how you use your hands. You can use your hands and your arms. You can walk across the stage, but make sure that these are all adding to your story and they're used at an appropriate point of time. Using your hands to kind of encourage the audience or show like this is a really great point to be excited. The other side of performance is vocal inflection. So you can influence your audience by using your voice. If you're excited about something, your audience is going to be excited about something. You can use inflection and cadence and pauses and direct the emotion that you want your listeners to feel and experience. So if there's a really important part to your science and you really need somebody to do something or a call to action or get involved, tell them that is what you need to happen. Tell them that that's the point they need to pay attention to. If you're enthusiastic about it, they're going to be enthusiastic about it. And you can really use this to your advantage. Just kind of a quick example, using children's stories is a really great way to practice this. And highly, highly recommend practicing out loud. Practice with a friend, practice with a stranger, and try a bunch of different ways of you're using your voice to express different parts of your story. So I'm just going to read a really short snippet from a children's story, and I'm going to read it first how we often hear a lot of very tenured scientists discuss their science. So, before there were seasons, the cricket would fly. He flew faster than a bumblebee. He flew higher than the falcon. And he flew fancier than the flying Marmaduke, who was fancier, who was quite a fancy flyer. So oftentimes when we hear technologists speak, it's monotone, it's flatline. There's really no difference from slide to slide or component of the story. And we often see this as a way to convey technical information. It shouldn't be exciting. We have this standardized language as scientists that we use. But think back to a conference you've been to, a meeting you've been to, anywhere where you've seen a speaker. Who are the people that have stood out to you? Who are those dynamic speakers that you absolutely remember day after day, year after year? Generally speaking, those scientists are going to be people who have used vocal inflection and added to their performance and made their storytelling a little bit more dynamic. So reading that short story again, using vocal inflection, you can say, before there were seasons, the cricket could fly. He was faster than a bumblebee. He was higher than a falcon. And he flew fancier than the flying Marmaduke, who was quite a fancy flyer. So hopefully you can see the difference between the two. I want you to experience different parts of that story. I want you to see that the bumblebee is flying faster. I want you to picture that a falcon is soaring high into the air. And the same thing can be applied to your science. So instead of going out and saying, I studied G-coupled or G-protein coupled receptor antagonists to mitigate inflammation, you might consider saying something, I'm using drugs that block these receptors so we can turn off inflammation, and this is going to help us mitigate these situations in this disease. In those differences, one, I'm using language to shorten the connection between those jargon words, and two, using vocal inflection to show where you're heading with the story, what might be more important. You could also even say, hey, this is the really exciting part about my research, or surprisingly, this drug has been studied for 60 years and we still don't know why it works. Helping your audience learn, what are the really important parts of your story is going to help make you more dynamic and more memorable. And ultimately, your audience is going to come back and ask you for more. So with that, I'd like to back to our two gracious grad students that have been working on their talks. And Angelina and Prerna, if you're there, if you could unmute yourselves, I just wanted to ask you a few questions and ask you to contribute a little bit about your experience. So first, Angelina, could you just share very briefly what your topic of research is?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm working on studying how specific molecular signaling pathways, and in particular the mTOR pathway, the mammalian target of rapamycin pathway, regulates myelination in brain and spinal cord tissues during development.
Great. And Prerna?
Hi everyone. Hi, Dr. Greene. I like this slide that you used for us. Okay, so my research focuses on understanding the restoration of endothelial hyperpermeability in inflammation disease conditions such as ischemia, reperfusion, or stroke, or even cancer.
Awesome, thank you. So Angelina and Prerna have really taken some of the first leaps in putting this into practice. And I'm going to use Angelina as a bit of a guinea pig here and just talk about some before and after. So a few weeks ago, we asked Angelina and Prerna to provide some visuals, an abstract, and an initial audio version of how they would talk about their science in a short manner. And so here is the introduction by Angelina.
Similarly to how electrical wires are coated, in order for the cable underneath to be insulated, axons of nerve cells get insulated with a special biological coating called myelin. Oligodendrocytes are the cells that produce myelin in the central nervous system that includes the brain and the spinal cord tissues, and this insulation facilitates the rapid propagation of the electrical signals in order to accelerate the communication between the different neurons.
Great. So one thing that Angelina used here, which is fantastic, is immediately opening with this analogy of a USB cable. It's something that everybody, almost everybody, will have seen or used, and it's something that you can picture, and you're immediately starting to ask, you know, like, what are the connections? Why are we talking about USB cables? I thought we were talking about neurodegenerative diseases. But one thing that we tried with Angelina is sort of turning the story around a little bit and using some techniques about adult learning and audience planning to use that same metaphor but in a different manner that will help get the audience to engage right away. And one of the techniques for doing that is phrasing it as a question, or an imagine this or an imagine that. So here's the after.
Have you ever had a USB cable where the wire coating has begun to fall off? If yes, I am sure you have noticed that your phone does not get charged properly all the time anymore. This is because the insulation that the coating is offering to the cable is getting lost, and the electrical signals are not traveling at the physics anymore.
So what we did is we turned this around into a question. And the great thing about the question is that your audience is already going to start visualizing that for themselves. And they're going to start visualizing when they've broken a USB cable and start drawing a lot of those connections, okay? We're talking about conducting messages. The difference between the two is quite subtle, but the latter is going to help engage your audience from the get-go. And again, it's all about you know, creating those shorter connections and helping your audience engage and come to common ground a lot faster when you have a limited amount of time. Another part of Angelina's talk, so the meat and the nuts and bolts of my understanding of her research is trying to find a way to teach oligodendrocytes to perform remyelination. And so you have neurodegenerative diseases, there's damage to the myelin. She's trying to identify targets that can help repair this. And instead of going into the nuts and bolts of here's the molecular pathway that we're trying to address, here's one solution that Angelina used to broach this topic. Let's see if I can get that.
Have you ever had a USB cable?
Oh, sorry, wrong one. My apologies.
When wiring is missing, this can lead to defective electrical transmission. But if this happens, can we repair the damage ourselves? Surprisingly, the answer is not as simple.
So what you can see, she utilized here, again, her questions, helping her audience imagine that cable and imagine the relevance to myelin and disease, but then also using words like surprisingly, you're helping direct your audience to the key part of your story or the key part that you want to tell. So surprisingly, our bodies can't do this. So these are some really great techniques that were put into practice. And also what Angelina and Prerna were really great at doing was incorporating vocal inflection and telling their story in a way that helps convey their passion about their research. And with that, I would like to ask Angelina and Prerna, when you're trying to put your short talks together, what were some of the things that you found most difficult as you were constructing your stories?
Shall I start?
Angelina,
you're gonna go first?
Yeah.
I don't mind, whoever. Angelina, are you going first or am I going
Yep,
first?
Angelina, you go first. We'll go alphabetical. A for Angelina.
Okay. So I think the biggest challenge is try to find what are the highlights and what is the big message that you want to convey to your audience, and just try to put together talk in just 3 minutes. That's challenge number one. And number two is to, as Dr. Greene was saying, to eliminate all these technical terms and use more of a lay language to really convey the message to your audience without overwhelming the people that they are following your presentation.
Great. And Prerna?
Just going to reiterate what Angelina said, like the number one thing for me, even for the first recording for that matter, was jargon. It's very difficult to get rid of your jargon and try to make your research sound important and make people care about it. And one of the things that Dr. Greene commented upon is, if you're giving a talk, why should the person who's listening care? So trying to speak in the most basic words, but yet make your research sound so important that the audience should even spare 3 minutes to listen to what you're saying is the most difficult, apart from actually concising everything into the 3-minute time point.
Great, thank you. Yeah, especially when we work with such complex technical topics and we work with them every day at such a granular level, it's really difficult sometimes to kind of pause and step back and look upwards a little bit and look at what that big picture might be. So in going through, putting this into practice and thinking about how you want to convey your story and what some of those take-home points are, what are some considerations that you used when thinking about the audience that would be receiving this talk? So Angelina, how did you approach finding a common ground with your audience?
Yeah, as you said, I just try to find an example that could be relevant and at the same time commonly used or something that most people are familiar with, so that there is a common ground, they can relate to it, there is a connection, and then jump into the more scientific part so that it's more easily comprehended.
And Prerna, do you have anything to add to that?
One of the things that I think I'm going to spend a lot of time on, and it's a great take home from your talk, is finding that one picture which sort of nutshells your entire research. Where I really liked what you used for the drug design that crosses blood-brain barrier. So to be able to find that one image which kind of explains your entire project. I think that's what I'm going to spend a lot of time on, and I really want like an effective image to convey to the audience what I'm studying and how important it is.
Great. Do either of you have any lessons learned or any take-home messages that you'd like to share with our listeners today? Angelina?
Sure. Yes, it was a great experience because I got to understand how I can communicate my research better to a broad audience, because I think it's really important for scientists not to just work on the bench, but also communicate the research and inform people of how important what we are doing is. And that's even more important of the data per se and what you're producing. It's more important for the rest of the world to realize what we're doing.
Great. Fiona?
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the most important things that I take home from this session and the session that we had before this is that we may not always be presenting to an audience which is doing the same thing as we are or is interested in the same kind of research, which is the case mostly when we present at conferences or in-house seminars or seminars outside. So to understand that your audience could be from different backgrounds, of different age groups, and how to tweak your talk and take there into mind like 4 components of your talk and change them based on your audiences. I think that's one of the things that we often overlook, because I'm sure all of us have like a skeleton talk that we edit based on where we are going. But in order to change the essence of the talk based on your audiences is my main take home from this session.
Great. Yeah, I think both of you made some really great points. Angelina, yes, definitely. More and more, it's important as scientists that we effectively communicate our work, not only to advance the science, but also to garner support and change policy and ensure that we can continue to make scientific advances. And the better we are at communicating that, the more successful we will be at garnering support for our research. And Prerna, 100%, every time you give a talk, it really pays to make some minor tweaks to your audience and consider what is the collective scientific background of your audience, and what does their daily life look like, and how does that relate to your talk. So these are both really fantastic points to make. And so basically today we talked about Spark Talks in that 3 to 5 minute range, and the basic structure that will go into your talk and how to approach it, from understanding how your audience is going to learn and how your audience is going to engage. We touched a little bit on effective visuals and how not to overclutter a lot of the visual presentation and making sure that it adds to your story, and then also those finishing touches in the performance side of your story. And so with that, I'd like to open this up to Q&A. So if there's anybody online, or Doreen and Chris, if there's questions that have come through that you'd like to share, now would be a great time to ask away, or if there's anything else anyone would like to share.
Thanks, Laura. I just want to jump in real quick. If you have a question, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask it directly to Laura. That'd be fine.
Hi, this is Prerna. I actually had one question that Angelina and I both were talking about the last time we met. So this kind of training that we get is so important, that we're able to convey our research in this Spark Talk fashion. So if we want to sort of portray it as one of our skills that we have spent time to understand and to learn, concise speaking in form of exercises, how does one do that? Like, how do you put it in one line that you're sort of trained, or you've taken efforts to communicate efficiently? I guess I'm asking in terms of resume, for that matter. Like, if you wanted to say that I have learned concise speaking, how would I I or Angelina put it across to the reader?
That's a really good question. And Doreen, if you have any ideas to contribute, that's more than welcome.
Yeah. So for me, I've always you could one of the things you could do is have communication or expert communication have those kind of keywords in a so when I work with students and we're going over a resume, I typically have a section of relevant soft skills or transferable skills, especially for PhD students. You could have something there which says you're an expert in communication or informal communication, which kind of catches the eye of the reader because the top 1/4 of the resume is known as the prime real estate. So I wouldn't spend so much time there. But then as you go down in your experience section, you might want to put that you've participated in this workshop. You could have that there. So that would, I guess that would be one way to put it. Does that answer your question, Prerna?
Yeah, thanks, Doreen.
Yeah, I agree that in the resume, when you're listing off skill sets, that's a really great area to add keywords like communication. I use it. Are there any other questions?
And you could always, when you are going into the details of that site, Dr. Laura Greene, that she was the one with whom you did, and then if anyone looks up Laura's profile on LinkedIn, they would understand that this is an expert person, and so you've got this training from someone who's really good at it.
Right. I think somebody's asking a question on the chat box. Antonio.
Right, let's go to it.
Yeah, Antonio, he's wondering.
That's a good one for you, Laura.
I can't see the chat box.
So Antonio is, sorry, Chris, he's asking if we can suggest online and free sites to download images. And to continue in that line of questioning, Laura, if you could, if there are any rules that you want to highlight on using copyright images, if you want to talk about that as well.
So this is always a tricky area. So for a lot of, let's see, for seminars that I do through my employer, I tend to do a lot of self-design and graphic design myself. And I know that that's not something that a lot of people have time to spend on. But a really common thing is to use Google Images. So I use Google Images as a way to brainstorm for analogies and metaphors. And you can use a lot of tools in Google Images to select, if you're looking for colors or size that have high resolution that will project really well. There are a handful of websites, and I don't have them on hand right now, but there's a handful of websites where you can get free stock images or even like icons or vector graphics. For those, they tend not to be as dynamic as I would prefer if you're looking for a giant image to speak to. The rule that I operate, and this is primarily only applicable in academia, is that there's kind of this clause: if you're not using the image to sell anything or to have a profit, if you're using it to teach, then you can use the image. So if you're doing an internal seminar or an internal talk, it's perfectly within the academic parameters. I'm probably going to get struck by lightning from brand managers, but it's perfectly within the construct of academic setting to use Google Images for these informal settings where you're talking and teaching. Outside of that, it gets a little bit tricky if you're working in a formal setting where you're trying to earn a profit or on behalf of an employer that has a certain brand image they're trying to maintain. Then you need to work with your brand designers and your user designers and learn kind of what their licensing is or what's available in your own company. But afterwards, I'll find a couple of links to some free sites for good stock images, which is a great way to start. So I guess kind of to summarize, if you're doing an internal, informal, academic type talk, use Google Images, find high resolution images that project well. If you work for a private institute, a nonprofit, or something that you're doing on behalf of a company, or you're trying to make a profit, then you need to be cognizant of those licensing agreements. Does that help?
I think so. I definitely think so. And I just wanted to add on to that is that keep in mind that when you're looking for these images, you're looking for something very relatable, right? So they should be easy. You should find images easily on Google Images. Don't try to look for something which is which would be known to a very small micro population of people. For example, if I was doing something and I wanted to, I really, and this comes from Laura's use of that puzzle, children's toy puzzle to show the drug target and lead interaction. It's, if I'm talking about flowers, use an image of rose. Don't use an image of a flower that's only found on a Pacific island kind of thing. So you're trying to use images which would be known to a larger audience, so they should be easily available.
Yeah.
I think we have a few more questions.
I have one private one. From a business community. So we're not all scientists. There's a question about, is there ways you can think of that the business community can be supportive and help in this endeavor to, in communicating science to the non-science population, or if that makes sense?
So I'll ask a clarifying. So is it supporting scientists in communicating, or is it communicating the science as a non-scientist?
So the question's just along the lines of can help support the science community in this endeavor. So interpret it as you will.
So I'm going to take it in the context of how can we facilitate the sharing of science. So creating a venue is definitely a big draw. And opportunities for scientists to practice. So if there's an informal and welcoming environment, usually like a happy hour, a coffee hour, something that kind of provides this platform for short, sharp communication, that's one way to facilitate the communication. Another, if you're a non-scientist and you're working with scientists and you want to help encourage their effective communication, one thing I like to do is remind people that scientists are human beings, and again, we all have a shared experience at some point, and we have a common ground. And so, as a non-scientist, I like to ask people to challenge our scientists to tell a better story. So, if there's definitely something that doesn't make sense, make sure that you're asking your technologist to explain it in a way that makes sense to you. Have them do some of that heavy lifting and work to make the science relevant to you. And by creating an informal environment, you give a platform for more scientists to engage. And by challenging them informally and asking them to make it make sense to you, you're encouraging your scientists to communicate the meat of their research in a more effective way, and ultimately being able to share that information effectively is going to help everybody, whether you're a scientist or a business person.
Great, thanks.
And we have one more question, Laura. I'll try. I'm not sure if I completely understand the question, but I'll try my best to interpret it. So in your experience, and Prerna and Angelina, all feel free to weigh in on this. When you've been to Spark Talks, or if you're given the option to give a Spark Talk, what would you go with? A single PowerPoint slide or a poster?
Right. Okay. So generally, when you have a venue that is hosting a Spark Talk, they're going to have guidelines already established for you. And so the first part is, for any talk that I give and any presentation, I generally communicate with the organizers right off the bat and ask them about their preferred medium or what those guidelines are. and even use that opportunity to start asking about your audience and who's going to be there. Knowing some of those key attributes is really going to help you drive the type of visuals that you're going to prepare. So for a lot of Spark Talks and these short presentations that we see, unless they are unless the guidelines are elsewhere, I generally try to start with one slide and no more than 3 slides total. So I use one image to ground my audience and bring them all to the same level. I use a second image to add a little bit more meat, maybe talk a little bit more about that technology, and then a third image, if I have to bring the two back together and make sure that you're rounding out that story. Sometimes you'll find at large conferences that they're going to have these lightning rounds where you're not even going to have a visual, and your storytelling is what's going to draw the audience to visit your poster at a later time. So you know, while it's great to practice with PowerPoint and having visuals that help you cue, it should also be worth practicing without the aid of visuals and let your story kind of stand on its own feet. But at the end of the day, ultimately, your event organizer is going to have some idea of what they want to see, and so I'd start with asking them.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
And
If there are any more questions, feel free to unmute yourself, guys.
And I just want to jump in. So I used to do research, and I don't anymore. So I came into this like kind of wondering what I would get out of it. And I think it's pretty profound that a lot of the things you spoke about in terms of, you know, just giving too much information and brevity and the short time span that people really have to absorb your information, you know, these all really apply to kind of every scenario, not just these Spark Talks. You know, and also along the line of, it's easy for me, I know I do this, assume that people know what I'm talking about, that analogy you gave with the bike in the intersection. And that it might be better to be a little bit introspective, you know, not just in these talks, but, you know, everywhere. So this is some really good stuff. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, Laura, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate you spending time and giving all of us this unique opportunity to look at, you know, get out of our lab bench research zone and think about communicating research. And I was also thinking when you're talking that this is important, not just talking to lay audience, but you're walking down the hall and you meet the chair of a different department who doesn't, if it's not an immunology department, and how you convey your work to them. So it's all about leaving that lasting impression about your research and making it more relatable to the audience. And with that, I just wanted to leave this with a short note, because I know this is being recorded. So for those who are part of this webinar and those who will listen to this in the future, I do want to emphasize that for those who are basic scientists, who are doing basic research, or even who are doing translation research, this whole process, it sounds very easy that, oh yeah, I could talk about my research to someone who's not a scientist, but it is actually a very hard process. And you might, because I am involved with other students who go through this thought processing, it is hard to come up with those relatable analogies, to find these interesting pictures, but don't give up. What I'm trying to say is keep at it, keep talking to people, talking to friends who are not scientists, and stay at it, and you will get there. So that's all I have. And again, I want to thank the Westchester Biotech Project, Laura and Chris, and especially Prerna and Jelena.